Have you ever made one decision that destroyed your entire future? Imagine waking up one ordinary morning believing you had finally found the love of your life, only to discover that one choice, one lie, would cost you more than money, more than love. It would cost you the life you dreamed of. This isn't just a love story. It's a story of deception, of hidden intentions, of people pretending to be someone they're not, and of a shocking truth that no one saw coming. Someone in this story thought they were playing a clever game. Someone else believed they had found true love. But before this story ends, masks will fall, hearts will be broken, secrets will be exposed, and one person will spend the rest of their life wishing they could turn back time. The most heartbreaking part? It all began with what seemed like a simple act of kindness. Stay with me until the very end, because every scene will change what you think you know. And the final revelation will leave you questioning whether true love really sees the heart or only what the eyes can see. As dawn broke over the kingdom, the first rays of sunlight danced across the marble walls of one of the most magnificent royal estates in the country. Every morning, hundreds of workers came alive before sunrise. Gardeners carefully trimmed roses that stretched for acres. Chefs prepared breakfast worthy of kings. Security officers patrolled every corner of the estate. Luxury vehicles sparkled beneath the morning sun. From the outside, it looked like paradise, a place where dreams came true, a place where sorrow could never exist. But behind those towering palace walls lived a man whose greatest wealth could never fill the emptiness in his heart. His name was Prince Daniel. At just 30 years old, Daniel possessed everything most people spent their entire lives chasing: respect, power, influence, a fortune worth billions, the admiration of an entire nation. Wherever he appeared, people smiled. Business leaders fought for meetings with him. Charities praised his generosity. Young women dreamed of becoming his wife. Yet every compliment, every handshake, every smile directed toward him left him asking the very same question: do they see me, or do they only see my wealth? It was a question that haunted him day and night, because deep inside, Daniel wasn't searching for another admirer. He was searching for someone who could see the man behind the crown, someone who would still choose him, even if he had nothing. Daniel had learned something about loneliness that very few people ever understood. You didn't have to be poor to feel alone. Sometimes, the loneliest people were surrounded by the largest crowds. Every banquet he attended, every charity gala, every royal celebration, he was never short of company. Women smiled at him before he even spoke. Some laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Others competed for his attention, hoping to become the future princess. To the world, Daniel was the dream every woman wanted. But to Daniel, every smile carried a question. Would she still smile if she didn't know who I was? That question had become the prison of his heart, and the reason lay hidden in a painful memory he had never shared with anyone outside his family. 3 years earlier, Daniel had believed he'd finally found the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. She was beautiful, confident, intelligent. At first, she seemed kind and humble. She spoke about building a future together. She often told him, "Daniel, I don't care about your title. I just love you." For months, he believed every word. He showered her with trust, not because she asked for expensive gifts, but because he genuinely wanted to make her happy. He imagined introducing her to his parents. He imagined children running through the palace gardens. The future looked beautiful, or so he thought. One rainy afternoon, Daniel arrived early to surprise her. He had planned a quiet lunch, nothing extravagant, just time together. As he approached the cafe, he noticed her sitting inside with a close friend. He smiled. He was about to walk in. Until he heard his own name, he stopped. Not because he wanted to eavesdrop, but because something in her tone made his heart skip a beat. Her friend leaned forward and asked quietly, "Do you really love him?" The woman burst into laughter, not a gentle laugh, not a nervous laugh, a cold, careless laugh. She shrugged before replying, "Love? He's a prince. Do you honestly think I'd walk away from that?" The friend raised an eyebrow. "So, if he weren't rich?" Without hesitation, she answered, "Then another woman can have him." Daniel felt the world beneath him disappear. He didn't confront her. He didn't argue. He didn't demand an explanation. He simply turned around and walked away. From that moment onward, every compliment sounded rehearsed. Every act of kindness felt suspicious. Every declaration of love came wrapped in doubt. And slowly, the prince who once believed in fairy tales stopped believing in love altogether. Years passed. Daniel devoted himself to work. He expanded the royal family's businesses. He built hospitals, funded scholarships, helped thousands of struggling families. The kingdom admired him. His parents couldn't have been prouder. Yet every evening, when the palace grew quiet, the loneliness returned. He would stand by the same window, staring into the darkness, asking himself the same question: does true love still exist? Or is it just another fairy tale people tell themselves? Little did he know, fate had already begun writing an answer that wouldn't come from a queen or a wealthy socialite, but from the most unexpected place imaginable. And before that answer arrived, Daniel would make a decision so extraordinary that it would shock his parents, test his closest friendship, and unknowingly set him on a path toward two very different women, one driven by greed and the other by kindness. The following evening, for the first time in months, Daniel requested a private dinner with his parents. No royal advisors, no palace staff, no business executives, just family. Queen Clara noticed the seriousness in her son's face the moment he walked into the dining hall. Normally, Daniel greeted everyone with a warm smile. Tonight, his smile was gone. King Edward gently placed his knife and fork on the table before looking at his son. "My boy," he said warmly, "you asked for this dinner. What is troubling your heart?" Daniel remained silent for a few moments. His fingers tightened around the glass of water before him. He wasn't afraid. He was simply searching for the right words, because he knew, once those words left his mouth, nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel took a slow breath. "Father, Mother, I've spent years trying to convince myself that I'll eventually meet someone who truly loves me." He paused. "But every woman who comes into my life seems to fall in love with my name before she ever gets to know my heart." The room fell silent. Queen Clara lowered her eyes. She had feared this conversation would come someday. King Edward leaned back thoughtfully. "What are you saying, Daniel?" Daniel looked directly at both of them. "I don't want another relationship built on wealth. I don't want another woman impressed by luxury. I want someone who would choose me, even if I had nothing." Queen Clara reached across the table and gently held her son's hand. "My dear, there are still good women in this world." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know, Mother, but I don't know how to find them." For several long seconds, no one spoke. Finally, without turning around, he said the words that would leave the king and queen speechless. "I've made my decision. I want to leave the palace." Queen Clara's eyes widened. "Leave?" King Edward frowned. "For how long?" Daniel slowly turned to face them. "For as long as it takes. I want to disappear from the life everyone knows. I want to become someone the world would overlook. I want to see whether love can survive when wealth disappears." The king stared at his son. The queen covered her mouth in disbelief. Daniel continued, "I won't travel as a prince. I won't travel as a billionaire. I'll go as an ordinary man." Then he paused. "No, not just an ordinary man. I'll disguise myself as someone living with a disability, so that anyone who chooses me will truly be choosing my heart." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. Queen Clara stood immediately. "No, I can't let you do this. You have no idea how cruel people can be. They'll mock you, they'll insult you. I know, and perhaps that's exactly what I need to see. If people reject me when they think I have nothing, then I'll know who truly deserves a place in my life." Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. "You've already suffered enough." Daniel smiled softly. Sometimes, the only way to find the truth is to stop hiding behind comfort. For a long moment, he simply looked into Daniel's eyes. A king is judged by his courage, but a man is judged by his character. If this is truly what your heart believes, I won't stop you. But promise me one thing. Daniel nodded. Anything. No matter how painful this journey becomes, no matter how much your heart is broken, You must not reveal your true identity to anyone until you are completely certain that the woman standing beside you loves you for who you are, not for your wealth, not for your title, and not for the crown you will one day wear." Queen Clara gently placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder. "And promise us something else, my son." Daniel turned to her. "If you discover that someone has deceived you, don't seek revenge. Walk away with your dignity. Let your character speak louder than your pain." Daniel lowered his head for a moment before answering firmly, "I promise you both. I will keep my identity a secret until I find genuine love, and if my heart is broken, I will leave with honor rather than revenge." Then your journey begins today. None of them knew that the promise Daniel had just made would soon be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. There was one more person Daniel needed to tell, the only friend he trusted with every secret: Leonard. They had grown up together, gone to school together, built businesses together, and through every success and every disappointment, Leonard had never left his side. When Daniel explained his plan, Leonard didn't speak, not immediately. He simply stared, as though waiting for Daniel to laugh, and admit it was all a joke. But the laughter never came. Instead, Daniel calmly reached into his briefcase. He pulled out several photographs, old clothes, worn shoes, a pair of carefully designed wheelchair briefs, and a medical file prepared by palace specialists. Everything had been planned, every detail. Leonard slowly rubbed his forehead. "You've already prepared all of this?" Daniel nodded. "For months." Leonard leaned back in disbelief. "So, you're serious?" Daniel smiled. "I've never been more serious." Leonard walked toward the balcony. The cool night breeze swept across the palace grounds. "Finally," he spoke, "you know what worries me?" Daniel looked up. Leonard turned slowly. "It's not that someone might reject you. It's that someone might pretend to love you long enough to destroy you." The words lingered in the silence. Daniel lowered his gaze. "I've thought about that." Leonard folded his arms. "There are people who have turned deception into a profession. They study kindness. They learn exactly what people want to hear. They smile. They cry. They promise forever, when all they're really chasing is money." Daniel sighed. "I know," Leonard continued. "And when they discover you're vulnerable, they'll become even more dangerous." Daniel stood. "I can't spend my whole life hiding because I'm afraid of being hurt. If I never take this risk, I'll never know whether genuine love still exists." Leonard looked at him for several long seconds, then a smile slowly appeared. "You've already made up your mind." Daniel nodded. "Yes," Leonard laughed quietly. "You've always been stubborn, and that's exactly why I know I'll never be able to stop you." Leonard held out his hand. "If you're going into this alone, then let me help." Daniel looked surprised. "You'd do that?" Leonard smiled. "You've stood beside me every day of my life. I'm not letting you disappear without someone watching your back. I'll be your only contact. If anything goes wrong, one phone call, and I'll come for you." Daniel's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you." Leonard shook his head. "No. Don't thank me yet, because I have a feeling." He looked toward the dark horizon. "This journey is going to change all of our lives." Neither of them knew how true those words would become. At that very moment, across the city, a young woman named Ruth was laughing inside a tiny roadside cafe, completely unaware that destiny was already walking toward her, and before another week passed, she would make one decision: that she would spend the rest of her life regretting. Hundreds of miles away from the royal palace, life looked completely different. There were no marble floors, no royal guards, no grand chandeliers, just the ordinary rhythm of everyday people trying to make a living. Among the many small businesses on one busy high street stood a tiny cosmetics and accessories shop. It wasn't luxurious, it wasn't famous, but to its owner, it represented hope. Her name was Ruth. At first glance, almost everyone admired her. She was beautiful, confident, hardworking. She greeted customers with a warm smile that could brighten even the dullest morning. Many believed she was one of the kindest young women in the neighborhood, but appearances can be dangerously convincing, because behind that welcoming smile, Ruth carried a secret that almost no one knew. Business wasn't always easy. Some days, she barely made enough to cover the rent. Other days, she wondered if she should simply close the shop and start over somewhere else. But every evening, when the shutters came down, someone was always waiting for her. Steve, the man she believed she loved. Steve was handsome, smooth-talking, funny, the kind of man who could make almost anyone believe his promises. To Ruth, he was her future husband, the man she dreamed of building a life with. But Steve had dreams too, dreams that were much bigger than either of them could afford. He wanted expensive clothes, luxury cars, fine restaurants, weekend getaways, the lifestyle he saw wealthy people living online. The only problem, neither of them had the money to make those dreams come true. At first, they struggled honestly, working harder, saving every pound they could, but slowly, their conversations began to change. One rainy evening, as unpaid bills covered the table, Steve broke the silence. There has to be another way. Ruth looked up. What do you mean? Steve leaned back in his chair. You know you're beautiful. She frowned. So, there are men who would spend thousands just to take you out. For several long seconds, Ruth simply stared at Steve. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. The room became so quiet that the gentle tapping of the rain against the window sounded louder than ever. Finally, she shook her head. What are you suggesting? Steve leaned forward calmly, as though discussing an ordinary business idea. I'm suggesting an opportunity. Ruth frowned. An opportunity to do what? Steve smiled. To let foolish men spend their money. She immediately stood up. No, I'm not that kind of woman. Steve didn't argue. Instead, he spoke gently. Did I say you should sleep with anyone? Ruth hesitated. No, exactly, he continued. I'm talking about dinners, phone calls, a little attention, a few promises, nothing more. Ruth folded her arms tightly. That still isn't right. Steve sighed deeply. Right? He gestured toward the unpaid bills. Do these bills care about what's right? The landlord certainly doesn't. The electricity company doesn't. And the bank definitely doesn't. His words lingered in the air, not because they were true, but because they sounded convincing. That night, Ruth barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Steve's words echoed endlessly in her mind. We're not stealing, we're just accepting gifts. Rich men won't even notice the money. Every excuse sounded reasonable, until another voice whispered inside her heart, but it's still dishonest. She turned over, closed her eyes, opened them again. For the first time in her life, she found herself standing at the crossroads between honesty and temptation. The decision she made before sunrise would quietly begin changing the woman she was becoming. The following morning, before the first customer arrived, the bell above the shop door jingled softly. In walked Sharon, Ruth's closest friend. If Ruth was admired for her beauty, Sharon was remembered for something far more valuable, her heart. She had the rare ability to make people feel seen. She listened without judging. She helped without expecting anything in return. Even when life became difficult, she somehow found reasons to smile. Balancing 2 cups of coffee, she laughed. I knew you hadn't eaten breakfast. Ruth forced a smile. You know me too well. Sharon handed her one of the cups. I've known you since we were 16. You can't hide anything from me. If only Sharon knew just how much Ruth was already hiding. Sharon watched her friend carefully. You're quieter than usual. Ruth avoided eye contact. I'm just tired. Sharon smiled knowingly. No, something's bothering you. What is it? For a moment, Ruth almost told her everything. About Steve's idea, about the money, about the temptation. But she couldn't. Instead, she simply smiled. It's nothing. Sharon wasn't convinced. Still, she respected her friend's silence. If you ever need me, you know where to find me. Ruth nodded. I know. As Sharon returned to arranging products on the shelves, Ruth couldn't help wondering, if Sharon were in my position, what would she do? Deep inside, she already knew the answer. Sharon would never deceive anyone. Not for money, not for comfort, not for love, and perhaps that was the biggest difference between them. That evening, Steve made the choice easier. He placed his phone on the table. I've already created a profile. Ruth's eyes widened. You did what? I told you. I'm serious. He turned the screen toward her. Dozens of messages filled the display. Some men offered expensive dinners, others offered shopping trips. One message simply read, I'd love to spoil someone as beautiful as you. Ruth slowly looked up. I haven't even replied. Steve smiled. You don't have to reply to all of them. Just one, see where it leads. She swallowed hard. It felt wrong. Every instinct told her to walk away, to delete the account, to forget the conversation had ever happened. But temptation has a strange way of disguising itself as opportunity. After a long silence, Ruth reached for the phone. Not because she had stopped believing in right and wrong, but because she allowed desperation to speak louder than her conscience. And with that single decision, the first domino fell. Neither Ruth nor Steve could possibly imagine that the next wealthy man she would meet would be unlike anyone they had ever encountered. A man who wasn't looking for beauty, a man who wasn't looking for attention, a man who was searching for one thing alone, a heart that could love him, without knowing who he truly was, and destiny was already guiding Prince Daniel toward her. If Ruth believed that survival justified dishonesty, Sharon believed something entirely different. She believed that even when life became unfair, kindness should never become a casualty. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't own a successful business. Most months, she barely had enough left after paying her rent. Yet somehow, she always found something to give. Sometimes, it was money. Sometimes, it was food. But more often than not, it was simply her time. And in a world where everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere, that was often the greatest gift of all. Without hesitation, Sharon hurried over. Please, let me help you. The elderly woman smiled apologetically. My knees aren't what they used to be. Sharon laughed softly. Then today, you have me. Together, they carried every bag inside. The older woman reached into her purse. You've been so kind. Please, take this. She held out a 20-pound note. Sharon immediately shook her head. No, thank you. I didn't help because I wanted money. The woman looked at her with surprise. There aren't many young people like you anymore. Sharon simply smiled. My mom always said, if kindness expects payment, it was never kindness to begin with. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. She quietly whispered, whoever marries you will be the luckiest man alive. Sharon laughed, slightly embarrassed. If that day ever comes, I just hope he has a good heart. Little did she know, she simply hadn't met him yet. The next afternoon, Sharon returned to help Ruth at the shop. Almost immediately, she noticed something had changed. Ruth wasn't paying attention to customers. Every few seconds, she glanced at her phone. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she looked nervous. Sometimes she quickly hid the screen whenever Sharon walked closer. After watching quietly for nearly an hour, Sharon finally asked, is everything all right? Ruth forced another smile. Of course. You seem different. I'm just busy. Sharon nodded slowly. She wanted to believe her friend, but something inside her heart told her that Ruth was carrying a burden she refused to share. After Sharon left, the silence returned. Ruth locked the shop door, sat behind the counter, and stared at the phone lying in front of her. Unread messages, expensive dinner invitations, offers of shopping trips, weekend holidays, luxury gifts. Everything Steve had promised was already beginning to happen. Her finger hovered over the screen. She could still walk away, delete the account, pretend none of this had ever happened. But temptation is patient. It doesn't force the door open. It simply waits until someone unlocks it from the inside with a trembling hand. Ruth replied to her very first message, just one sentence. Hello, it's nice to meet you. She stared at the screen. Almost immediately, a reply appeared. Her heart raced. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. When Ruth told Steve what she had done, he celebrated as though they had already become rich. I told you, this is the beginning of a better life. He hugged her tightly, but Ruth couldn't bring herself to celebrate. Something deep inside still felt wrong, as Steve excitedly talked about the future. Luxury holidays, a bigger house, designer clothes. Ruth quietly drifted into her own thoughts. What if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life? It was a question she quickly buried. Because sometimes, when people chase the life they want, they stop listening to the voice that's trying to save them. And somewhere, not far away, another life-changing decision was about to be made. Prince Daniel was finally ready to leave the palace. The palace had never felt so quiet. Long before sunrise, While the rest of the kingdom was still asleep, a small group gathered at a private entrance hidden behind the eastern wing of the palace. There were no reporters, no royal guards lining the driveway, no photographers capturing the moment. Only 4 people knew what was about to happen: Daniel, his father, his mother, and Leonard. No royal farewell, no grand ceremony, just a family saying goodbye to the son they loved. Queen Clara struggled to hold back her tears. She had watched Daniel leave for university, travel abroad for business, and represent the kingdom across the world. But somehow, this goodbye felt different. Because this time, he wasn't leaving as a prince, he was leaving as a stranger. Clara stepped closer. She straightened Daniel's collar, just as she had done when he was a little boy. Then she smiled through her tears. No matter what clothes you wear, no matter where you go, you will always be my son. Daniel wrapped his arms around her. I'll come home, I promise. She nodded, though her heart was anything but certain. King Edward extended his hand. Daniel looked at it for a moment, then ignored the handshake and embraced his father instead. The king smiled. That's my boy, he whispered. Remember, never judge people too quickly. Sometimes the kindest hearts wear the roughest clothes. Daniel nodded. I won't forget. Once the farewells were over, Leonard opened the back of the vehicle. Inside, everything had been prepared. Plain shirts, secondhand jackets, old trainers, a worn backpack, carefully designed walking supports, specially fitted crutches, even lightweight prosthetics that would subtly alter Daniel's posture and movement, making his limp look completely natural without causing him harm. Every detail had been planned by professionals. Daniel stared at the equipment. For a brief moment, he hesitated, not because he feared looking poor, but because he knew what came with it. People rarely judged wealth by character. They judged appearances in seconds. Today, he was about to experience that trust firsthand. A few hours later, in a modest apartment rented under a different name, the transformation began. His expensive haircut was hidden beneath slightly longer, untidy hair. Designer suits were replaced with clean but inexpensive clothes. His luxury watch disappeared into a drawer. The polished image of Prince Daniel slowly faded away. When he finally stood before the mirror, even he struggled to recognize himself. Gone was the billionaire every magazine admired. Standing in the reflection was an ordinary young man, a man who appeared to be living with a physical disability, a man many people would overlook before he ever had the chance to speak. Daniel adjusted the crutches beneath his arms. He took one careful step, then another, and another. Each movement became slower, more natural, until even Leonard found himself forgetting who stood before him. He smiled. If I didn't know better, I'd believe this was who you've always been. Daniel looked at his own reflection. That's exactly what I need everyone else to believe. He closed his eyes, took one slow breath, and quietly whispered to himself, from this moment on, I'm no longer Prince Daniel. I'm simply Daniel. No title, no fortune, no palace, only a heart searching for another heart. As he opened the apartment door, he stepped into a world that would no longer bow before him. A world where strangers would judge him before hearing his name. A world that would reveal both the worst and the very best of humanity. Somewhere across the city, Ruth was preparing for another day at her little shop. Sharon was on her way to work with the same warm smile she wore every morning, and destiny, without asking anyone's permission, was slowly drawing all 3 of their lives together. Daniel sat quietly across the street, watching the world pass by. His eyes stopped on a young woman standing outside a small shop. She welcomed every customer with a warm smile. She laughed, she listened. She made everyone feel important. People left her shop smiling. Daniel couldn't help but smile too. Maybe people like her still exist. But what Daniel couldn't see was that the smile on Ruth's face disappeared the very second each customer walked away. The moment the last customer left, Ruth's cheerful expression vanished. She counted the money inside the cash drawer. Then she sighed. So much work, so little money. She looked around the tiny shop with frustration. I didn't dream of living like this. Her phone suddenly vibrated. A message appeared. Steve, meet me at our usual place. A smile slowly returned to her face, but this one wasn't for love. It was for a plan. Steve opened the envelope. His smile faded almost immediately. Is this all? Ruth looked disappointed. The business isn't doing well. Steve leaned closer. We can't keep living like this. I want more. A better house, a better car, a better life. Ruth took a deep breath. I'll find another way. Steve looked into her eyes. You know you're beautiful. Use it. She didn't answer immediately, but deep inside, a dangerous idea had already begun to grow. The following morning, Ruth noticed him. A quiet man, neatly dressed, polite, disabled, alone. She watched him struggle to reach a bottle of water. For a few seconds, she simply observed him. Then she smiled, not because she felt sorry for him, but because she saw an opportunity. Here you go, Ruth said softly. Daniel looked up. Oh, thank you so much, she smiled warmly. It's nothing. No one deserves to struggle alone. Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. He didn't notice that while he was smiling, Ruth was quietly studying him, his clothes, his watch, his wallet, trying to figure out how much he might be worth. Just then, another young woman entered the shop. It was Sharon, Ruth's closest friend. She looked outside and noticed Daniel waiting at the bus stop. Then she turned back to Ruth. Don't tell me you're thinking about using him too. Ruth laughed softly. Oh, Sharon, you're too emotional. I'm just being friendly. Sharon folded her arms. I know that look. Please don't play with that man's feelings. Ruth picked up her handbag and smiled confidently. Relax. I know exactly what I'm doing. Sharon watched her leave. With a heavy heart, somewhere deep inside, she feared that an innocent man was about to have his heart broken. As the evening sun painted the streets with golden light, Ruth remained unusually quiet. Her eyes never left the man sitting across the road. Daniel. He didn't look wealthy. He wasn't dressed in expensive designer clothes. He moved around in a wheelchair. Yet there was something about him that caught her attention. His manners, his calmness, the way he spoke to everyone with respect. She tapped her fingers lightly on the counter. If I play this carefully, she thought, he might become useful. Sharon looked at her friend and immediately recognized that expression. It was the same look Ruth had whenever she was planning something, and somehow, that frightened her more than anything else. That evening, Ruth met Steve at their usual cafe. She told him about the quiet man she had noticed. Steve listened without interrupting. So, he finally asked, does he have money? Ruth shrugged. I don't know, but he's polite. He seems generous. Steve leaned closer. Then find out. Ruth hesitated. He's disabled. Steve gave a careless shrug. So? If he likes you, he'll spend on you. We need money, Ruth. We can't keep surviving like this. Ruth stared silently into her cup of tea. Deep inside, she knew exactly what Steve wanted her to do. The following morning, Sharon couldn't keep quiet any longer. She watched Ruth fixing her makeup. Then she spoke softly. You're really going to do this? Ruth smiled into the mirror. I'm just making friends. Sharon shook her head. No, I know you. You only become interested when you think someone can benefit you. Ruth laughed. You worry too much. Sharon stepped closer. What if he's sincere? What if he genuinely falls in love with you? For the first time, Ruth paused. Then she smiled again. That's his choice, not mine. Those words sent a chill through Sharon's heart. The next afternoon, Daniel returned to the small park where he often found peace. He enjoyed watching children play, watching families laugh together. It reminded him why he had left the palace, to discover real life. Just as he was lost in thought, a familiar voice interrupted him. Mind if I join you? Daniel looked up. It was Ruth. She held out a cup of coffee. I noticed you here yesterday. I thought you might like some company. Daniel smiled warmly. I'd like that. Neither of them realized that one conversation would soon change both of their lives forever. For nearly an hour, they talked. Daniel spoke honestly about life, about hope, about believing that kindness still existed in the world. Ruth listened carefully. She laughed at the right moments. She nodded when he spoke. She even shared stories, most of which weren't entirely true. She described herself as lonely, as someone who had no one to depend on. Daniel's heart softened. He admired her strength. He believed every word. What he didn't know was that every sentence had been carefully chosen to earn his trust. As the sun disappeared beyond the skyline, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time since leaving the palace, he believed he might actually meet someone who could love him for who he was. Ruth smiled as she walked beside him, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She noticed how willingly Daniel paid for the drinks, how easily he trusted people. She smiled to herself. This might actually work. Across the street, Sharon watched them together. She wasn't jealous, she was worried, because she knew her friend's smile, and she feared that behind it, an innocent heart was slowly being led toward heartbreak. Little did any of them know, the hardest test was still ahead. Days slowly turned into weeks. Almost every afternoon, Daniel found himself looking forward to seeing Ruth. Their conversations became longer. They talked about childhood memories, dreams, life, and the future. Daniel admired how easily she made him laugh. Whenever he felt discouraged, Ruth always seemed to know exactly what to say. But what Daniel believed was genuine care was for Ruth, carefully rehearsed affection. She had learned his favorite foods, his favorite places, even the little things that made him smile. Not because she loved him, but because every smile brought her one step closer to earning his complete trust. Later that evening, Steve counted the money Ruth had brought. When he finished, he frowned. "This won't change our lives," Ruth sighed. "I'm trying." Steve stood and began pacing. "Trying isn't enough. If he likes you, he'll do more. Men in love become generous." Ruth looked uncomfortable. "I don't want to push him." Steve stopped walking, then smiled. "You don't have to push. Just make him believe he's special." Those words echoed in Ruth's mind long after she left. Without realizing it, she had already crossed a line she could never completely erase. The next morning, Daniel's message lit up Ruth's phone. "Good morning, Ruth. I hope today brings you nothing but happiness." Ruth smiled. Not because the words touched her heart, but because she knew she had him exactly where she wanted him. Sharon noticed the smile. "Is that Daniel?" Ruth nodded. Sharon placed the handbags down and looked directly at her. "He's falling for you." Ruth shrugged casually. "So?" Sharon's voice became firmer. "If you don't love him, please let him go." Ruth slipped her phone into her handbag. "I never asked him to fall in love." Sharon lowered her eyes. Sometimes, the cruelest people weren't those who shouted. They were the ones who smiled while breaking someone else's heart. That evening, Daniel decided to tell Ruth something he had never shared with anyone outside his family. "I've always wondered if someone could truly love me." Ruth turned toward him. "What makes you think they wouldn't?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Because many people only notice my wheelchair. They never take time to know me." For just a brief second, Ruth felt something. Not love, not guilt, just a small moment of discomfort. But it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. She reached out and gently held Daniel's hand. "Anyone who doesn't see your heart doesn't deserve you." Daniel looked into her eyes. He believed every word. A few days later, Daniel was sitting in his wheelchair in his average apartment. As he invited Ruth, they had dinner. After dinner, he brought out a gift. "I saw this and thought of you," he said shyly. Ruth accepted it with excitement. "You shouldn't have." Daniel smiled. "I wanted to." Inside the box was a beautiful necklace. Simple, elegant, not extravagant, but meaningful. Ruth hugged him warmly. "Thank you." The moment Ruth left, she quickly checked its value online. Sharon watched silently. She wasn't upset about the gift. She was heartbroken that Ruth never once appreciated the thought behind it. Only the price. That night, Steve admired the necklace. "This is beautiful." Ruth smiled weakly. "He gave it to me." Steve laughed. "Looks like he's already in love." He placed the necklace back into her hands. "Keep wearing it around him. It'll make him think you treasure his gifts." Ruth nodded quietly. As she walked home alone, she stared at the necklace. For the first time, a question crossed her mind. What if Daniel really means every word he says? She quickly shook the thought away. No, feelings wouldn't change the plan, because in her mind, love was a luxury, money was survival. And survival always came first, but destiny had already begun rewriting everyone's future. As the weeks passed, Daniel found himself smiling more than he had in years. Every moment he spent with Ruth made him believe he was getting closer to the dream that had brought him away from the palace. That afternoon, he reached into his pocket and handed her 2 tickets. "I was wondering if you'd come with me this weekend." Ruth looked at them. "A music festival?" Daniel nodded. "I've never really gone anywhere with someone, just to enjoy the day." Ruth smiled sweetly. "I'd love to." Daniel's heart lifted with joy, but the moment she got home, she called Steve. "I'll be busy with Daniel on Saturday." Steve smirked. "Good. The closer he gets to you, the more he'll trust you." Ruth quietly ended the call. She didn't notice that every lie was becoming harder to untangle. Sharon had been watching everything. The messages, the gifts, the daily visits. She knew Daniel was falling deeply in love, and she knew Ruth wasn't. That afternoon, Sharon finally spoke. "Ruth, what happens if he asks you to marry him?" Ruth burst into laughter. "Marry him?" She shook her head. "Sharon, be serious." "I could never marry a cripple." Sharon's smile disappeared. "Then stop giving him hope." Ruth sighed impatiently. "When the time comes, I'll find a way out." Sharon looked at her friend in disbelief. She had never been more afraid for another human being's heart. As they strolled beside the lake, Daniel looked unusually thoughtful. "Can I tell you something?" Ruth smiled. "You can tell me anything." Daniel took a deep breath. "My greatest dream isn't wealth. It's having a home filled with laughter, a wife who stands beside me, and children who grow up knowing what genuine love looks like." Ruth smiled and nodded. But inside, her thoughts were somewhere else. She was wondering how much money Daniel had managed to save. Daniel looked at her with hopeful eyes. "I think dreams like that are worth waiting for." Ruth squeezed his hand gently. "They are,